In the 1940s, Newfoundland's Bell Island mines were the lifeblood of the community, employing thousands of local men. The miners' wives learned to recognize their husbands at a glance by their body language. How they walked or carried their lunchbox was enough to distinguish one man from another, even at a distance. One woman caught a glimpse of a miner standing just ahead of her. She recognized his stance and his familiar clothing. She was positive it was her husband, despite the fact that the man she loved had died several months earlier. She remembered walking with him to the mines each day, how she would watch him begin the long journey down into the tunnels without her. Then she recalled hearing the horrible news. There had been an accident and her husband was dead. But now, here he was, standing right in front of her. She was sure of it. She walked towards him, knowing it was impossible, but wanting so desperately to believe. Slowly, he turned, and she saw that it was her husband. But it was not the face she had loved. It was the face of death. Perhaps the grave is not deep enough to hold the many lost souls of the Bell Island mines.
Mining is a dangerous occupation, one which requires a very special brand of courage and determination. On Bell Island in Newfoundland, there were plenty of men ready to take on that challenge, and in many cases, it cost them their lives. Very few places have as many ghost stories surrounding them as the Bell Island iron ore mines.
A miner had finished his shift. As he headed towards the lockers, he was joined by a pleasant young fellow who mentioned several times that this was his first day on the job. As they continued along, the young man simply vanished. The confused miner approached a co-worker and told him what had just happened. His friend told him the story of a young miner. On his first day of work, he was put on scraping duty and was responsible for removing any loose rock from the recently dug tunnels. He was struck by some falling stones. Though bruised, he believed the injury to be minor, so he continued with his work, eager to make a good impression. Later, he became dizzy and collapsed. Before anyone could help him, he died of a massive concussion. Since that day, miners had been approached by the spirit of this young man, always cheerful, but disappearing the moment they reached the entrance to the tunnel where the fatal accident occurred.
Men who come up at the mines afterwards who were hired on over the years, they would find themselves walking and talking to a young man who was 18 years of age. And that happened to so many men on so many different occasions that number 2 mines actually shut down. Years ago, the men, when they started to use dynamite, of course blasting was a dangerous job. And the company had decided to use a new form of dynamite, which was a lot more powerful, but they neglected to tell the blasters.
The explosives crew was considered the elite of the workers. They were methodical men who took no unnecessary risks. That fateful day, the unwitting miners followed the same tried and true procedures they always had. ensuing blast had twice the expected power. By some miracle, only one of the men was killed. After a long recuperation, the survivor went back to work in the mines and even considered returning to explosives work. He was shocked to see the figure of his dead blasting partner. His face still bore the scars caused by the explosion. The figure reached out for him and vanished. The survivor never touched a stick of dynamite again.
An awful lot of men who worked in the mines saw this young man, right, and saw different young men who were killed in the mines.
Other miners began seeing this scarred and bleeding man standing near the blast area. Only to have him disappear into the rocks. Even his own widow reported glimpsing her mutilated husband's spirit.
There were an awful lot of men killed in the mines. There's probably somewhere close to 100 men that were killed. And one of the most famous stories that surround the mines are number 2 mines, where the men actually started to come up at the mines one night, and all the men that came up and left the mine were dead. And a lot of people saw it.
Why this parade of spirits chose to appear in the 1940s is unknown. Perhaps sensing the mine's impending closure, they chose to move on. Unfortunately, most of the witnesses to this event have themselves died, but their children still remember these and many other legends about the now closed mines. The stories have been passed down from generation to generation as fact rather than fiction. Recently, the mines have been reopened for tours, allowing visitors to experience firsthand how these brave men lived and died in the darkness 1,000 feet beneath Bell Island. Hidden away in the wetlands of Manitoba, 50 kilometers north of Portage-la Prairie, stands a remote research station. Some say a shrouded figure roams the grounds around the building, which used to be the Mallard Lodge.
The Mallard Lodge is located in the Delta Marsh, 50 kilometers north of Portage-la Prairie. Originally a hunting lodge, it is now home to the Delta Marsh Research Station, part of the University of Manitoba. However, it seems there is one scientific anomaly at the lodge which science can't explain.
The Delta Marsh wetlands are internationally renowned, and not just for the abundant wildlife.
Hi, my name is Ginger Arnold, and I've been working here at the Delta Marsh University of Manitoba Field Station for 3 years. And over the years, I've heard many ghost stories from people who have experienced them. Some people believe that there are ghosts here, and a lot of people have claimed to see ghosts.
In 1932, Murray was a caretaker and had been employed for many years by Donald Bain, the former owner of the lodge. Though the grounds were well kept, he always allowed the natural rugged beauty of the area to show through. Murray worked hard and took great pride in his tasks. Often, on his day off, he would go out onto the wetlands for the finest duck hunting in all of Canada, a pastime he truly loved. Preparations for one particular outing would end in tragedy. While cleaning his rifle, it accidentally discharged, killing Murray instantly. Evidently, his loyalty to the lodge remained strong. After the death of Mr. Bain in 1962, the lodge became the property of the province of Manitoba. In 1966, the University of Manitoba acquired the lodge and the surrounding lands, transforming it into the Delta Marsh Research Station, open to senior researchers and students alike.
I guess the most prominent story would be a friend of mine, Adrian Robertson, when he, I guess, encountered something here. And there was a figure in the window. So the first thing Adrian did was, once he got in, and it's such an old building, he just came in and stopped and listened. And then went into room 3 and found nothing. There was nobody under the beds, in the closet, or anything.
Many encounters with Murray's ghost occur in room number 3, which is believed to have been his quarters for the many years he lived at the lodge. After a long drive through the night, a researcher arrived at the lodge, dreary and tired. He was given room number 3. Anxious for sleep, he didn't even change his clothes. He just fell onto the bed and started to drift off. Unfortunately, his rest was quickly interrupted. Too frightened to return to his room, the researcher tried desperately to keep himself awake. But soon his exhaustion overpowered his fear, and he attempted once again to get some sleep. However, his efforts were in vain. Although Murray loved his former place of employment, he seems upset with the many visitors frequenting the lodge. Perhaps he feels they are disrupting his peaceful home, especially when they are staying in room number 3. Sightings of Murray are common at the Old Mallard Lodge. The feeling of being watched has become normal. Reported visions of a faint, hooded figure wandering around are not unusual. Though the building is now a scientific research station, there seems to be no scientific explanation to lights turning on and off on their own, or this mysterious hooded figure appearing and disappearing at will. This sometimes frightening spirit may very well be the old caretaker Murray, who, for reasons unknown, seems unable to give up his duties at the much-loved lodge he still considers his home. The remnants of a once great mansion, christened the Hermitage by its builder, still stand in Hamilton, Ontario. Destroyed by fire in the 1930s, the ruins are a mere shell of the splendor that once was. But among the remains, two paranormal entities from the manor's opulent past have been reported. A park employee approached the ruins and was shocked to see a body hanging from a tree. He was stunned, fearing someone had committed suicide. The figure swayed in the wind and then vanished. The terrified employee ran. Later, he learned there had been a suicide at that very spot, but he was over a century too late to have stopped it.
Originally built in 1865, the Hermitage ruins still stand in Hamilton, Ontario, a mere shadow of the Grand Estate's historic heyday. What's left of this once great home has been preserved for future generations, including the past residents who remain trapped in the mansion they once called home.
Today I'm standing in front of the Hermitage ruins in Ancaster. Once a beautiful mansion built by the Leith family in the mid-1800s is now a set of stone ruins after a large fire in the 1930s claimed it. One of the legends at the Hermitage involves a coachman by the name of William Black. Now, William was a servant of Otto Ives. He was in love with his niece, so they went to Otto Ives and they told him about what was going on. He flipped out. He couldn't have his niece being involved with a lowly servant. William Black couldn't take the pain of not having his love, so he went out back with a length of rope and hung himself. The legend goes that William Black still travels between the spot of where he's buried to the Hermitage, carrying his length of rope and looking for his lost love. People have reported seeing William Black here at night, the tall, dark figure of a man. They've seen him disappear, but also we've gotten reports of people who saw him, got scared, and turned around and quickly went the other way. Well, I've always felt that there's a lot of energy at the Hermitage. Not all good energy, there's a lot of negative energy here. I had an unusual experience after one of our ghost walks. I had to go around the one side of the Hermitage to call the people who were kind of milling around back to come back out because the security guard's going to lock the gate. So I ran around the right side of the Hermitage and I saw two people, looked like they were dressed in black, but it was very dark. Right after I called out to them, as if they didn't really hear me, they started turning and going towards the forest. I was a little bit confused at that point, so I called out again. I said, "We have to go, they're gonna lock us in." And they walked right out into the forest, so I ran over there. I shone the flashlight out and there was nobody there. I can't say I was threatened by the two ghosts I saw, but definitely when I come back here at night, it's the first thing that pops up into my mind.
This second ghost is described as an elderly woman, and many believe her to be the spirit of Alma Dick Lauder, the last owner of the Hermitage Mansion.
Alma Dick Lauder bought the mansion off of her family and fell in love with it. This is where she wanted to stay. After it burned down in the 1930s, she was so adamant about staying on this land, she actually set up a tent in front of the ruins and lived in that tent with her crippled dog until her death in the 1940s.
Alma loved her home so much that she may have stayed on long after her death. This spirit possesses a unique ability. It seems to be able to control what others see. An engineer traveled to the Hermitage, eager to study the building's foundation. He did not find the ruins he expected. Instead, there was a ghostly image of a stone mansion in full splendor, drifting in and out of focus like a mirage. As he approached, the building returned to its ruined state. The man heard a sound behind him and turned to find an elderly woman staring at him curiously. Perhaps she wanted to offer a brief glimpse of the building as she remembered and loved it. and then she vanished. The terrified engineer had no desire for any further exploration. The skeletal remains of the once proud Hermitage Mansion still stand, now home only to these two spirits. One, a man who loved a woman so deeply he could not bear to live without her. The other, a woman whose devotion to the manor was so strong that death could not take it away from her. Thousands visit the ruins each year, but a fortunate few may, if the spirit is willing, catch a glimpse of the splendor which once was. In Montreal, Quebec, the building at 1234 de la Montagne Street has had a long and intriguing history. During the 1900s, it was a successful mortuary. In the 1970s, it was reborn as Club Esprit, the city's most popular nightclub. Ironically, the English translation of the word esprit is spirit. The manager of Club Esprit arrived early one day and was surprised to see a woman standing at the top of the stairs. She was alluringly beautiful. She smiled at him and slipped away. Curious, he followed her through the club, all the while wondering how she had gotten into the locked building. Many employees had reported strange events in the club, but the manager had yet to experience anything unusual himself. Cautiously, he approached the mysterious woman, not wanting to startle her. He was stunned by the horrifying vision and resigned as manager that day, making this his first and last paranormal experience at 1234 de la Montagne.
The building at 1234 de la Montagne in Montreal, now home to the World Beat Complex, has a particularly menacing haunting. These are not passive ghosts, but aggressive apparitions whose physical appearance embodies our darkest fears.
The 1234 de la Montagne used to be the funeral home that was very well known around the whole Quebec province. But when it closed down, rumors circulated about necrophilia, which was never proven.
Perhaps the spirits of those people whose bodies were defiled here have not been able to rest in peace. It's possible that the perverse events of the past have left a negative, supernatural energy in the present, which manifests itself in these nightmarish apparitions of the dead. During 1234 de la Montagne's period as Club Esprit, a hostess came face to face with the ghosts of the building's dark period as a mortuary. A mutilated apparition approached her and then vanished. Suddenly, it reappeared over the landing, just a few feet away from her. The spirit she described looked as if it had undergone an autopsy, with crudely stitched scars crisscrossing her bandaged chest. It was a horrifying sight.
From what people have been reporting, we're not talking, about good, nice, happy spirits. Some of them might, but mostly we're talking about ugly, disturbed apparitions. So it doesn't sound like it's a good situation here. We have one story that comes at some point where one of the girls went downstairs to the bathroom and got hit in the face by unseen ants.
The ladies' room was the scene of many frightening encounters at Club Esprit. There were reports of entities that seemed to shift from vaporous matter to solid flesh at will, These were not calm spirits, but angry and violent apparitions. One young patron was attacked by the strange, mutilated woman. The figure seemed to disappear and reappear, but never relaxed her vice-like grip. Suddenly, the scarred figure released the young girl and vanished for good. What is now the ladies' room was once the mortuary's embalming area. Perhaps long ago, this was the site of some depraved desecration of human corpses. Not all the experiences at 1234 have been with malevolent spirits. Staff of the current Worldbeat Complex Art Center, now housed here, have reported more positive encounters with the spirit world.
Well, I had a personal experience with a ghost. It was a really strange encounter. I heard a sound and I was going to hear what it was, and then there was a big blue light, very, very bright, and it was like a ball, and it was shooting towards me, and it came in and entered through my arms, and then it filled my entire body. So after that, I couldn't believe it, but I didn't realize it was a ghost until after it escaped and it left my body. But it was a really crazy and overwhelming experience that I've never ever felt before. Okay, I think that there were more ghosts before. We actually had to hire a professional witch who came in, and she performed some cleansing ceremonies. But I still think that even after she got rid of a lot of them, that there were still some ghosts that stayed. I think that there will always be ghosts that feel home here, and that they're gonna always be here.
I believe that the ghost activity has subsided here because it was abandoned for 8 years. It was abandoned for 8 years because a lot of the businesses that opened here had suffered already with, problems with their business because of the haunting activity here, which was not good. Possibly it subsided also because there was no human activity here to disturb the spirits themselves. As this building will progress, I mean, if people could start coming in, if it's more active, I believe that yes, it could come back. It could possibly restart the activities as it used to be.
The new owners have had nothing but benign encounters with the resident ghosts and hope the darkness that has long surrounded this building has finally moved on. But perhaps the evil entities are simply lying in wait, plotting their new reign of terror on the living at 1234 de la Montagne. In Drummond Hill Cemetery, many claim to have witnessed soldiers from the past returning to this one-time battlefield. A waitress on her way home from work cut through the cemetery. Although this was her normal route, on this particular night, for some reason, she felt uneasy. With every step, this feeling grew. It was as though she was being watched. She stopped for a moment and looked behind her, and though she saw nothing, she was unable to shake this sense of fear. It wasn't until she was beyond the gates of the graveyard that she felt safe. Now, from outside, she peered in. To her astonishment, she saw 3 soldiers, and then, in an instant, they were gone. Confused and frightened, she left the cemetery, vowing never to cut through there again.
In 1812, the Battle of Lundy Lane took place on Niagara Falls, Drummond Hill. Many lives were lost, and the area was immediately transformed into a cemetery. Now, over a century later, the spirits of 3 young Canadian soldiers still roam this hallowed ground, seeking an end to the horrific battle that claimed their lives.
In the War of 1812, Niagara Falls was a strategic military location. For the Canadian and British forces, it was a passage point through which they could expand the territory under their control. For the Americans, it was a direct route to infiltrate the opposing forces garrisoned in the area. As a result, many skirmishes and heavy battles occurred.
We're here at the Drummond Hill Cemetery, where on July the 25th, 1814, was the scene of the bloodiest battle in the War of 1812 between the British, Canadian, and natives on one side and the approaching American forces on the other. It was hot, it was humid. There were bodies all over the place because of the humidity, because of the stillness in the air. The gunpowder just made the air around here like soup. Friend and foe were accidentally killing each other because they couldn't see the enemy. The Americans retreated, and the Canadians won the Battle of Drummond Hill. Approximately 1,700 soldiers, the average age of 15, lay on the field, dead or dying.
One day, a local man took his normal shortcut through the cemetery to get home. He had heard countless stories about the legend of Drummond Hill, but never believed them. In the distance, he saw a strange male figure, then another, and yet another. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the 3 soldiers vanished. The young man dismissed the experience, deciding that his eyes must have been playing tricks on him, and he continued on his way. However, as he walked further down the pathway, an unsettling feeling came over him that he couldn't shake. When he glanced back, he saw the same 3 ghostly soldiers advancing toward him. At first startled, then frightened, he ran off in an attempt to escape the gun-wielding trio. He stopped for a moment to glance back at his pursuers. The 3 spirits were still right behind him. He sprinted away as fast as he could and never looked back again. The individual identities of these 3 soldiers remain a mystery. It is believed that they died at the Drummond Hill battle, protecting the British line. Perhaps they were 3 friends, fighting and dying side by side.
Over the years, the Drummond Hill Cemetery has become somewhat of a tourist destination for Americans and Canadians alike. But recently, a new kind of tourist has shown up here, the ghost hunter, the paranormal seeker, the researcher. There have been specters of lights photographed. There have been soldiers as if standing guard over certain tombstones. Truly, this has got to be one of Canada's most haunted graveyards.
This unlikely tourist destination attracts thousands of history and war enthusiasts every year. One such visitor came to admire the graveyard's historic headstones. However, on this night, he would encounter more of the past than he had bargained for. The spirit of one of the 3 soldiers made it clear that this cemetery was still under their guard. While the shaken tourist was physically unharmed, he was shocked and confused by what he had just experienced. This history buff decided he had seen enough of Drummond Hill and its phantom century. The soldiers who paid the ultimate price and gave their lives for the good of their country believed so strongly in their commitment that it seems even today, 2 centuries after the bloody battle, at least 3 of these brave men continue to uphold their duties. And according to many visitors, startled by the ghostly trio who protect the cemetery, they should still be commended for a job well done. The Mar Residence in Saskatoon is a museum and meeting center, but after hours, it takes on a life of its own as home to an array of spirits. A staff member had stayed late, finishing notes after a board meeting. She heard footsteps echoing through the empty house. The sounds seemed to be coming closer and closer. She was shocked when a man stepped into the doorway. He was pulling on a pair of white gloves. His body was transparent, and he began to almost vibrate, as if being electrocuted. She knew this was not an actual human being, but some sort of apparition. Then the strange man walked away. Frightened but curious, she followed. Entering the downstairs parlor, she found herself surrounded by floating orbs of light. These luminescent balls seemed to dance around the room, accompanied by the sound of children's laughter. The mysterious lights fascinated her, and for a moment she forgot her fears. Until she turned and saw the man from upstairs outside the window. His expressionless stare sent a shiver up her spine. And as her terror intensified, she ran away in fear.
Saskatoon's Mar residence is one of the most unique and historically important houses in Saskatchewan. It is also haunted. Ironically, this very small home houses 3 distinct and separate ghostly entities.
The Mar is the oldest house in Saskatoon that's still on its original site. It was built in 1884, and the city acquired it in 1979, and it became a designated heritage property and is now open to the public for programming. There was a group of school children that came through the building one summer, and one of their chaperones was a woman who was psychic, and she was very intrigued by the possibility of ghosts, and actually came back later and walked through the house with us and described the various presences, including the fellow in the upstairs bedroom. She said he was a fairly reclusive sort, spent a lot of time in his room reading. He worked at a business that required him to do record keeping, and he was very proud of his penmanship, and he was very vain about his hands, and he always wore gloves on his hands whenever he went outside.
The antique desk that was once in the upstairs bedroom is now displayed in the parlor. This may explain why the ghost has begun to appear downstairs. For a quiet, educated man, this writing table was most likely where he felt at home. Following a function, another staff member heard sounds coming from the parlor. She saw a young man sitting at the desk. When he saw her watching him, he immediately stopped what he was doing, picked up his white gloves, and walked off into the corner of the room, out of her sight. She went over to investigate, but found the room was empty. But the most startling part of the encounter was the desk itself. The woman watched in amazement as all the items began to disappear one by one. And then the writing table closed up on its own. The room had returned to normal, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something there with her.
When you look through the Henderson directories for the years 1909, 1910, There's a fellow named Charles Gathercole who lives at this address. And Charles Gathercole works as a clerk in a business on Broadway, 2 blocks east. So we think that perhaps the ghost of Miss Charles Gathercole, and we refer to him as Charles. The ghost downstairs is a very unsavory sort of character, and both the woman who worked in the office upstairs and I felt uncomfortable in the basement. She said she could only be down there for about 10 minutes at a time before she felt somebody watching her. And he's big and burly and dirty and bearded, and he's got yellow teeth and yellow fingernails, and he smells. And he's just a very unsavory character. And he also has expectations of women and that they should know their place.
Many of the staff have had unnerving encounters with the spirit in the basement. A woman went downstairs to locate some stored files. Immediately, she felt uncomfortable, as if something was not only watching her, but inexplicably, she felt quite threatened too. Something began to pull at her purse. Some invisible, malevolent force was trying to take it from her. She held on tightly to the bag, and for a moment her unseen attacker relented. Then an imperceptible energy pushed her against the wall, almost knocking her to the floor. Terrified, she ran upstairs and has never returned. No one knows who this malicious spirit could be, or why he seems to have such a disdain for women. The third paranormal being at the Marr residence is in sharp contrast to the dark, evil entity in the basement. Passers-by often report mysterious flickering lights in the windows. This phenomenon is known as sprites or pixie lights. Employees have witnessed these lights on several occasions. They report seeing small glowing orbs that float through the rooms in an almost playful fashion. Some staff members were convinced that if you stared directly into the orbs, you could catch quick glimpses of children and hear the sounds of their laughter. These mysterious lights, also known as dead man's candles, are most often seen in cemeteries. Native Indian legend suggests they were there to guide the recently deceased through limbo and onto the other side. Perhaps before the Saskatoon area was settled by Europeans, Indigenous people used this spot as a burial ground. The ghosts of the historic Marr residence are truly a unique combination. Trapped in this small space are childlike balls of light, a quiet, solitary man, and an embittered brute that dwells in the basement. Why such a diverse group of spirits have chosen to share this home remains a mystery. Perhaps the floating orbs are really mystic guides trying to lead the other two souls beyond the confines of Earth and into the freedom of the afterlife.